All right, hopefully everybody in the back can hear me. I don't really even need the mic, but thank you very much. So as Robin mentioned, today we're going to be going over kind of a change in onboarding approach. So taking it from implementing a product or a service and really making sure that you're understanding the needs and goals and wants of your customers so that you can guide them towards achieving those goals instead of just implementing a product. So Robin stole a little bit of my thunder. So my name is Erin Bowers. I've been with Totango just under 5 years. I was a CSM up until about 6 months ago, and where I've moved into a position to really kind of build out our implementation strategy. That includes things like new implementations and onboarding, which some of you have been through, or currently in, maybe in the next few months. And then also a component of that is services, which I'll kind of highlight a little bit more. Fun fact of me, I have twin boys that are 4 years old. So when not working, I actually probably apply kind of my business strategy to them as well when it comes to fighting over cars and dinosaurs and things like that. So the service component of Totango, this is not only the implementations and new business that comes into Totango, but it's also things that are like, as you're evolving in your own business, you're acquiring companies, you're buying or acquiring companies and then like releasing new products. Really, if there's any change in structure within your organization, that's where our services team can come in, kind of help reevaluate what is happening within the organization and make sure that we help you guys to still be and continue to be successful with Totango. So on my team, there's kind of two separate positions. There's an onboarding consultant, so they're driving really from a business aspect, project management, driving those customers to those objectives and those outcomes. And then a customer success engineer. So any of you that have been through implementation probably know these two roles. They're really all things technical, data modeling, making sure that we're able to replicate your business model, what you guys need to see to be successful, and then anything integration related. So whether it's your CRM, it's product usage data, it's ticket data, financial systems, whatever it may be, they handle those things. Awesome. So these are kind of the four main highlights of what we're going to cover today. Really how to understand your customers' goals, how to document those things, whether it's currently for you not in Totango or utilizing Totango moving forward, how to kind of help your customers prioritize in the framework to do that and those business outcomes that they are defining, and then kind of the iteration for continued support. So setting yourself up for success moving forward. So as we all know, when customers buy a product or a service, or if any one of us have ever bought a car, a pair of shoes, a house, you want to get the ROI or the value or the satisfaction of making that purchase at that time that you're signing that contract. You have my money. I've paid you. I expect to get value and ROI from that. So the customer's expectation, as we've all known, as soon as that contract signed, kickoff should have been yesterday. So how do we help them really start to see that incremental value over time? And also, like, how do we get them to that first value so that they are satisfied with what they are purchasing or what they are currently implementing? I see a few phones taking pictures, so I'll try to slow down. And everything will be available afterwards too. There's cameras being recorded and all the slides should be available. So for any of the sessions that you're not able to go to, you'll be able to get them afterwards. Okay, thank you. Hopefully this one's better. So there's kind of three components that your organization really has to get right in order for your customers to experience a really rapid and seamless onboarding. And that's kind of these 3 points here. Your organization has to be really customer focused and ensure that during that point of transaction that there is a cultural and kind of company alignment with what those customers are looking to achieve. As we heard a little bit earlier from the SAP team, there's also things like segmentation and kind of your data model. How are you engaging with your customers? Is it going to be a low touch or tech touch or a high touch account? And making sure that those things are kind of clearly defined so we know who to get involved, who to have as a part of these conversations. And then the last piece that I'm really going to dive into in today's section is what are the kind of the processes and the documentation that should be used in order to help you guys achieve really driving your customers to the right outcomes. So those are things like discovery questions, the process that you should be using to ask those questions from the sales handover. This remote is not working either. There we go. So these are kind of the three focus areas that we'll talk about today. So the handover, the usually dreaded handover for a lot of organizations. How do you make sure that you're getting the right information from your customers? The additional discovery, so really starting to dig into your customer's business and make sure that you're just not implementing the product that's been sold or the service that's been sold to them, but actually aligning what their needs and goals are to your implementation strategy. And then lastly, we kind of touched on it, the prioritization and iteration. So how many of you in the room are actually doing onboardings yourself? So like 50, or actually it's kind of like split right down the middle here. So about 50%. So as we all know, I've been with Totango just under 5 years, so I've implemented probably many of you in the room at some point or another. These are all challenges that we hear with any of our implementations or onboarding. These are all of my priorities. The customer doesn't know what they purchase. We now have new contacts that are involved in onboarding. They don't know even what this tool is. I said this a little bit earlier. We needed to have this live yesterday or weeks ago. We've needed this for so long. The ever so dreaded comment of, well, our data is really messy. Like, how are we going to be able to have a successful onboarding? And then, of course, kind of the churn, renewal, onboarding, adoption, all of these things are an issue for us. We want to solve all of them. They're all a problem. We need those right now. So what do you think that we call all of this chaos that happens during onboarding? Chaos? It's called boiling the ocean, right? We're trying to solve too many problems right away with not enough real understanding as to why we are doing these things, or really what solving these things are going to actually help within the organization. So how do we kind of take it from a boiling the ocean approach, trying to stuff a product into a solution that we're really not sure is actually ultimately solving the problems of the customer or helping them achieve their business goals? And I think that really starts with the handover. So as we know, or in my experience, in my many years of doing this, that the handover, the sales team, the account executives, they have quite a depth of information, but they might not document it. Or maybe it lives in Salesforce, or it's in a Google Doc somewhere, and they're not really consolidating that and sharing that information with us. So one of the things that we really find helpful is having multiple hour sessions, or at least an hour session with our customers and with the account executive to make sure that that transition is very seamless and smooth. We're asking to really have the account executive kind of regurgitate everything that they have learned during that implementation, during that sales cycle. That can include the account executive. As you heard Guy mention earlier, he's usually involved in some of the really large opportunities that come into Totango. So who are those individuals that should be a part of kind of that sharing of knowledge, that transfer of knowledge? Typically, it's the account executive. There's some kind of foundational, kind of basic information that we should be able to gather from the account executive. So if they are not able to tell us the customer's business goals, or they're not able to tell us, in detail why they purchased, these are some of the things that should kind of be like the bare minimum that somebody should be able to tell you about why a customer purchased. So things like, and Ravit kind of showed you a little bit today about that form. So, these are things that later in my slides I'll show you. You can, if you're in Totango, you can start to utilize feature functionality to kind of guide the sales team in gathering this information. So things like what product purchased, What's the provisioning? What feature functionalities have been turned on? What's the contract value, the renewal dates? What are, hopefully, if we have some understanding of what those product goals were, or like the business objectives and outcomes, these are kind of, like I said, the foundational things that we need to ask and really start to kind of train the account team or the account executives to start to ask and uncover during that sales cycle. Cue next slide. So here's a kind of quick overview of some of the things that you can do within Totango. And also, if you're not in Totango today, just, whether it's Google Docs, it's some type of shared form, it's some central repository for all things customer. So during that sales handover, at Totango, we like to do at least an hour handover. That includes our solution engineers from sales, our account executives. That includes the CSMs from kind of the receiving end, and then also the CSEs, so those engineers from the customer success side, so that there's a real kind of meeting of the minds, sharing of information to make sure that, who likes to buy something and have to start their conversation all over again, right? Like, you just went through days, weeks, months, as we heard SAP say, like sometimes years of like sharing information, gathering, really the momentum to help transfer things or kind of help make that purchase. So in doing that, we need a way to transfer that knowledge that can then also be shared amongst the organization. Whether it lives in Totango, it lives in Google Docs, it lives in Salesforce, wherever that is, we need to make sure that we have that foundational understanding. So these are some examples here. Ravit showed the form earlier. This is a functionality of Totango that would allow you to kind of pre-populate questions, or if you all are familiar, an attribute, and you'd be able to have that sent to the salesperson to say, this is the information that I need. I would then recommend that you are having a shared meeting of the minds to make sure that you are covering those items. And obviously, us in customer success, we ask why, we dig in, we have more questions. So again, this is just kind of the foundational piece of it. Those sales and sync meetings, you can also gather anything. A lot of customers, I feel like, that are making this transition in and through customer success are documenting a lot of this. It's slides, it's PowerPoints, as Carrie and Shelby mentioned earlier. It's like years and years of really trying to tell their story as to why this change is important and what the impact is going to be. Those are things that if our customers are sharing those with you, save those. It's a wealth of knowledge for you. And actually, as we talk about iteration towards the end of the presentation, that's really what you can use to continue to drive and kind of, it's almost like a project plan for you to continue to drive and towards those goals and those outcomes that they've outlined in that document. So here's just an example of attaching those things within Totango, but obviously for those of you that are familiar, logging touch points, including attachments in your touch points or attaching them to the accounts is definitely going to be helpful, not only for you, but if you were to ever get an account from somebody else that's maybe mid-transition or mid-onboarding, that should be, again, kind of the spot that you go to for all that information. And then this is kind of where I say, I guess in the last 6 months or so, I've really started to hear at least our sales team say table stakes. I guess I don't play poker, but I think it's a poker term. This is kind of like that foundational, you must know these things about your customer. You must be able to transfer this over to the customer success team, or else ultimately it's not going to be as successful. And like I said, you have then kind of having to start the whole discovery and almost like the whole sales process all over again, because you're asking some of these kind of foundational questions. And then I think most of the CS folks tend to be more on the right-hand side. We're asking more and better, more prescriptive questions. We're helping to understand more about that organization. And then somewhere kind of in the middle, the blending of the two is really where, we have, I think, the chance to really shine and really help guide our customers through the right journey. So that additional discovery with the customers, I think this can come in many forms. A lot of the times for us, we are doing this on site with the customers. It is multiple hours of really digging into their business, asking things like, what has worked, what hasn't worked, why is that important, where does your data live? And as you continue to do this discovery, it's going to help you understand their business. You're kind of becoming part of their organization. It's also going to help you be able to set up, what does my configuration plan of my product look like? So if you start to find things out that don't align to the product or don't apply to how you do business or how you can service them, how can you start to surface those things? Once you've identified, kind of those business goals, repeat those back to the customer. Get alignment of the executive. So don't just have it focused on that core team that you're working in. Because as we know, a lot of the times executive sponsors, they come to kickoff and then they leave. So really trying to keep them involved and make sure that their bonuses and their compensation structures are tied to really achieving these goals. So how do we help make sure that the entire customer's organization is really driving towards what we've understood from them? And again, this is just kind of an expert tip within Totango, but taking your findings and putting that into Totango or into some format that you can use to reference repeatedly throughout time. So think of your renewal is coming up and somebody said, oh, we didn't have a good onboarding experience, or how we've configured the tool doesn't align to my business goals, whatever it is, we're not getting value. That's the thing, right? We're really not seeing value. That's typically what we hear. Always be able to reference back to these documents to be able to say, well, Mr. Customer, this is what we understood from the onboarding, and this can take place at any point in the journey. Here's the attachments. This is what you've shared with me. So it's that central repository to be able to go back to and reference throughout time. One of the third and final step is around prioritizing and then being able to set yourself up for iteration moving forward. So something that we do here is as we're uncovering those needs, the business challenges, how do we move the customer forward in helping them to prioritize? Sorry, I thought there was a slide missing. How do we help them to kind of lay everything out on the table? What are all of your challenges? What are your goals? What are your needs? What data is needed? How do we configure this within the tool? Or how do we service you if it's a service component? And kind of putting that all out kind of on paper or virtual paper, however you convey it back to them. And making sure that they're able to prioritize those items so that we're not trying to configure the product or the service to something that's really a low priority to them. We really have had them prioritize. So this is just a simple kind of 2x2 chart here, but this can be something like, of your goals, who are we going to target, for this release? Is that a quick win? Is it something that will show a great first value, kind of minimally viable product, or it will be a big win for us? Once you've kind of started to prioritize those items, focus on kind of the top 2 or 3 to achieve. Obviously, all of our products are very different. So you'll kind of have your own assessment of, can we achieve 2 of these things or 10 of these things out of the gate? But as you're prioritizing these things, what's going to have the biggest impact and is the simplest to do first? So for any of you that are familiar with 2x2 charts, kind of focusing on those ones that we think will have the highest and largest impact first. And then obviously those eventually come to an end, and then we have to move into our next group. So, after those high impact ones, which ones maybe have a middle impact or mid impact and that are semi-easy? Or do we want to go into, these are really difficult, but, should we actually achieve these things, it will have another great impact. So again, kind of documenting those things, being able to kind of look back on them and make sure that that's still what the customer is needing. This is really where kind of the iteration piece comes in. Is this still important? We defined this 6 months or 6 years ago, whatever that span of time is, making sure that you are coming back to what was originally defined as an important business objective for that customer and using that to kind of set yourself up for this is our next phase, phase 3, phase 5, so on and so forth. And as you're doing that kind of iteration planning, making sure that the business goals and objectives haven't shifted. Has there been an acquisition? Is there new data to factor in? Has the landscape greatly changed that may completely skew what we defined weeks, months, or years ago? This is just kind of a flywheel. You guys may be familiar with just kind of this continuous iteration, continuous process. But as you're going back to those objectives, do we have the group that we want to target or the feature functionality ready that the customer is needing to achieve these things? Do we understand what we're looking to achieve? You need to have the right people involved in that. So it may be a completely different team. It may be the same team that you have worked with in the initial rollout. And then actually executing it and continuing to measure that as you're moving forward. So making sure that what you are rolling out is still aligned with the organization and has it been successful with the rollout. This will also really help with if you are rolling out a product or a service, making sure that what you have rolled out is actually being adopted. So that measure piece is really important because you want to make sure that what you're doing, the work that you're doing, all the time and hours and things are really going to be adopted by either your end users or your customers to make sure that it's all being successful. This clicker does not like me either. There we go. So just a little bit of a recap of kind of the 4 points that I've made kind of throughout this is, it's really important for you to understand your customer. It is, thanks, 3rd time's a charm maybe, now that I'm at the end of my slides. So it's really important to understand the customer, making sure that you have that knowledge of the customers that, they really also feel like you want them to be successful. You're a part of their business. You can speak in their language. You can talk about their products. I had a customer tell me one time as I was actually transitioning them to another account or to another CSM, like they really appreciated that I was able to use like their objectives, their goals, their product terminology. It really made them feel like I really understood their business and it wasn't just I sold you a product and I'm implementing that product. Documenting the learnings, I think, as I mentioned, that can be in many forms and fashion. It can be within Totango. It can be within Google Docs, Salesforce. If you're a Totango user, there's things like tasks, touch points, attachments. These are all going to be pieces that hopefully will give you one holistic view of the customer. Prioritizing those items moving forward, this will really help kind of narrow that focus. If we go back to kind of the boiling the ocean component, this is where we want to throw everything and solve everything and, there's water that's spilled, you have to get everything off the table real quick, it's getting everything done. We can't be great at everything. So let's focus on what we can really achieve, what we can really have a strong impact on, and let's try to tackle those things. And then those ones that aren't in kind of that top priority, how do we set ourselves up moving forward to make sure that we have kind of a phased approach, a phased rollout that are going to help us still kind of achieve those business goals, but ultimately, it's not kind of that first 1 or 2 phases. And the next, this one's much better. So this is just kind of the high-level recap. If you remember, this was one of the first slides kind of down towards the bottom. But these are kind of the major blocks here. Nailing the handoff, doing the additional discovery, prioritizing and iterating for continued success. And I think that brings me to just about 30. Do we have any questions? So I think for the multi-hour sessions, that's going to be, or an hour session, that's probably going to be for your high touch, right? The ones that, and again, for everybody's business, it's a little bit different. I think that's where some of the automation comes into play for, you know, the smaller accounts or for that real scale. Being able to send a new account closes. This is a functionality of Totango if people don't know. Being able to create a success play, you know, and send that form out so that you're gathering that information and really kind of building that into the sales handover process. If that's built out into Totango, having them load the attachments or, you know, fill out that form, I think that's the real automation piece for the scale or for lower touch accounts.
Thank you. And then my second question was, in your world, or maybe as you've seen in other businesses, how quickly are your value roles assigned after the sale?
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
How quickly are your roles, you know, your customer success roles assigned after a sale? So how much of a gap is there between the sale and then the sharing of information?
Yeah, so in our world, it does depend. So some of our CSM team, and actually Robin, who is the microphone person, is the leader of the CSM team. So her and I work closely together in defining, you know, who would be the best CSM, whether it's based on region or knowledge. You know, we have some CSMs that kind of have like an education background, you know, whatever that is. So getting them looped into POCs or on site with a customer if we know it's going to be them as soon as possible. You know, it's probably the last, like, I'd say 30 days or so of kind of negotiations and things. And then at that point, there's already that learning, that discovery happening. And I think the CSMs can play a huge part in kind of front loading that conversation instead of having to wait until the contract is signed. Does that answer both? Yep. Robin behind you, I think.
Oh, behind me.
Hi there. I have a quick question about, you talk about the form that helps with the knowledge transfer. How have you guys navigated through with clients who also utilize Salesforce with the behavior change for salespeople not having to duplicate their work, but doing it only once?
Yeah. So we use Salesforce also at Totango. So there is going to be information that where are you from? What? Lucid. Okay, so you're probably figuring this out right now. So with the integration with Salesforce, you know, if that's where the salesperson wants to fill out the information, this is kind of a process decision. And that's where, you know, they're very tried and true to Salesforce from a sales piece. We don't want to have them have to duplicate efforts. So I would say have them do it in Salesforce and then integrate that data into Totango. So make sure that those fields are being mapped over. And I think that's kind of your foundational layer. And then based off of that, the CSM has that in Totango, and they can use that for kind of their continued conversation or deeper dive. We don't want to like duplicate efforts or, you know, upset the sales guys who are bringing in the money, right? At least portion of the money.
Hey there, I just had a quick question. So how would you advise working with a customer who's really not bought into the vision of the product? They really just want to basically map on what they did previously to what they've bought, and they really don't see the larger vision that you have in place for them.
So are you saying they don't have a larger vision, like maybe they were brought in at a later point?
Yeah, they're just sort of helping with the onboarding. They weren't part of maybe the evaluation, and they don't really see the end goal. They just basically want the quickest way to finish.
I think it happens a lot. So I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier that we'll have people that actually are buying the product and the tool or the service, but they're not the ones that are helping to implement it. So I think in a way you kind of have to start to resell them. You have to tell them, you know, or show them this is the functionality, these are the things that you can do. And I think part of that is discovering what their wants and needs are. You know, what are they looking to achieve? What would make them look like a hero to help, again, kind of guide your configuration and setting them and hopefully their organization up for success. So I think chat tools, like I'm a remote employee, I'm solo in my house, that's how I'm communicating. I'm not putting, at least how we have it configured, like really important information in there that it sounds like that may be. I would think that Totango in your case would be the central repository for that. And then there are ways that you can share that information, or whether there's weekly meetings or monthly meetings where you can, pull up a list of those accounts and notes and things like that. I think it is important for us personally. What we do is we have the AEs on our kickoffs, and then for some of our really strategic accounts, they're involved in those communications. Over my years, and Robin can probably attest to this too, even if the AE doesn't have an action to go and take something, they have probably the longest relationship and the most wealth of knowledge of that customer, at least to the point of onboarding. So keeping them looped in with what those things are, copying on emails, sharing information from Totango, whether it's sharing, through Zoe, the account profile or a segment, things like that, to just kind of make sure. But it sounds like if it's happening or needing a lot, I think kind of like a weekly check-in, maybe something like if you align with one AE, maybe having a weekly 30-minute or hour meeting and just kind of giving them the gist of the status of the accounts. I know for a lot of organizations, the AEs are, their kind of role is around expansion too, so they have to stay involved. They kind of become like an account manager in some setups. So that's going to be really important to make sure that they stay involved, because you don't want them to ping pong back and forth. It just is not a good experience. Okay.
Hello, Erin.
Oh, hi, Vinayak.
Vinayak Trivedi, Bentley Systems. Question is related to the documentation part. As we started moving towards the customer success tool, the newer version with the Totango and all, our traditional documentation of user interactions, all sorts of user interactions, was in Cloud for Sales. And still, we kind of duplicating with the workaround before Totango comes in. We are still doing in Cloud for Sales, and nothing against Cloud for Sales or anything, but in general, the sentiment is that it's painful to maintain a lot of interaction transactions. I'm not talking about the sales-related transactions.
As with all CRMs.
Right. Any suggestions there as we move on? Do you foresee that all of our user engagements that happens through the CS team could be taken care of in Totango, and we could move completely
That's a
from
loaded
there?
question, Vinayak. I would want to do more discovery. No, so I think, the short and ideal answer would be yes, that, nobody is having to manage multiple systems, that there are systems that are talking to one another, right? And I think that's on the plan for you guys specifically, is being able to have the CSMs, the Successforce team, for you guys really living in a tool that is all things customer engagement, customer data. And then if there is data that needs to get passed back to a different system, so that the folks that live in that system, that's kind of the ideal situation, is that nobody's having to go into two systems to get data or to document data or get a holistic picture of the customer.
Hey, Erin, Damon Loschiavo, T-Mobile. How
Hi.
are you? I'm kind of curious to know what your KPIs are for your onboarding consultants and customer success engineers.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you incentivize them? Ensuring that they're hitting their milestones and being successful.
Yeah. So I didn't dig into exactly how we're running it in Totango or how you could run it in Totango, but we track the stages of onboarding. So we have kind of high level, is a customer in onboarding? Are they in adoption? Are they established? And then within onboarding, there's kind of 6 phases that we track. So our customer health in onboarding is based on a customer not staying in a certain phase for X number of days. So if it takes us 3 weeks to schedule a kickoff, we've lost 3 weeks and the customer's probably starting to fade, right? So we have time around the metrics around the time that they are in each sub phase of onboarding. So kickoff, configuration, data model, things like that. And then within our success blocks, which hopefully you guys go to some product meetings today and are able to see those if you're not privy to those. Within those, we have KPIs that I'm able to see, just number of accounts in onboarding, average days in onboarding, onboardings by CSMs, different phases, things like that. So that's really what we're tracking as far as like health of the accounts are tied to those specific metrics. And then obviously the people implementing, you know, they're heavily looking at like the health of their accounts and the time in onboarding.
We
Okay.
have time for one quick question.
Yep.
Any hands? No?
Yep. I think in the back behind you again, Robin.
No, you're fine. I'm blinded by the flashes.
Paparazzi.
All right. So, in regards to sales handover, and you know maybe how you did it at Totango, or another customer you've worked with, how did you get the AE's buy-in or the organization's buy-in to take and spend all the time to do proper handovers? Maybe it's ingrained into Totango's culture because of the software you sell, but maybe another customer.
Doesn't mean it's ingrained in everybody. No, so I think that's the piece is like when things start to go south and you're having to get the AE back involved, you start to have a little bit of a light shown on you, right? Like not that you want to be the problem child, but it's keeping them involved, looping them in, and making sure that like you are documenting, you know, if they've sold vaporware or things that haven't been configured yet, like really making sure that you're tracking those things so that you can start to kind of flush out those issues and kind of tying that back to the AEs. I think all of, at least for Totango, all of our AEs want to stay involved, actually more so than probably they can because they're supposed to be new business. But they, you know, they want to make sure that their customers are successful. And I think it goes back to them having built kind of a relationship. You know, our sales cycles aren't quick usually, I guess, besides SAP. So everybody else, you know, there's months and months of like relationship building that has happened there. So I think fundamentally people want everybody to be successful.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Erin.
Thank
Great
you.
questions, everyone. Thank you so much.